Beacon Press Audio presents Asian American is Not a Color. Conversations on Race, Affirmative Action, and Family by OiYan Poon. This audiobook is narrated by Cindy Kay, published by Beacon Press Audio, 2024. Introduction. But Asian American isn't a color. To my daughter, Tay-Tay. When you were just 3 years old, the world around us felt like it was burning down, and simultaneously felt full of possibility. In 2018, we were in the midst of the Trump presidency. Our government was cruelly separating children and babies from their families at the U.S.-Mexico border, incarcerating them for fleeing intolerable conditions in their homelands that could be traced to a history of U.S. military interventions in Central America. We attended a rally in Colorado to protest the family separations and inhumane treatment of asylum seekers and immigrants. You wore your favorite rainbow glitter butterfly shirt in solidarity. We talked about how butterflies migrate to survive and in search of possibilities for thriving. This was not your first protest. Your father and I had brought you to several protests before, in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Between the time you were born in 2015 and when you turned 3, law enforcement officers had killed thousands of people, with Black people the most likely targets. Movements were building both in opposition to racism and to forge a more humane and just world. Your father and I often discussed the news of the day, our worries and dreams for the future. With NPR on the radio in the background one night, you asked me, "Mama, are we Black?" "No, we're not Black," I answered. "Are we white?" you asked. "No, we're not white," I said, suspecting what you would ask next. "Then what are we?" you wondered out loud. "We're Asian American," I responded. "Can you say Asian American?" "Asian American," you slowly pronounced in your sweet 3-year-old toddler voice. You precociously pushed back. "But Asian American isn't a color." I was stunned into silence by your innocent wisdom. Your very succinct and true observation highlighted the absurdities of race and racism in ways that my decades of scholarly training and professional career as a race scholar had not. I knew we would have these conversations about race and racism as you grew up. I just did not anticipate them to come so soon, so early in your life, less than 40 months into our journey as mother and daughter. Simultaneously pleased and startled by how astute your observation was. I remember fumbling through some sociological explanation about how race is a social construction, while my thoughts ran all over the place. What a brilliant observation. How did she know enough to ask about race in this way? Has she been hearing messages about race and racism in preschool? From TV? Listening to me and her father talk about the news? All of the above. I explained that black and white are like colors in your crayons. But when we're talking about people, we know that black people's skin tones can be different shades of brown. And white people's skin tones aren't often white like fresh snow. I told you that Asian Americans have all different kinds of skin tones too. I reminded you that your Auntie Taz is also Asian American. She's Bengali American, and her skin is like warm sand, a deeper shade than our golden light brown skin tone. Before I could continue, you had already moved on to talking about an episode of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood or some other toddler pop culture. I hadn't finished telling you about how humans have all kinds of beautiful skin colors. But our society has been shaped by a history of people with light skin tones, particularly from Western Europe, colonizing and exploiting lands and people with more melanin than them around the world. And this history of human relations and oppression, power and racial meanings, had created these socially constructed notions of race and color and racist hierarchies that granted people with lighter skin color and European phenotypes more affirmations of their humanity and opportunities for material wealth in an unjust system of racial capitalism. This history also meant that colors like black and white became references to groups of people whose relationships are mediated by racial power and contemporary legacies of historical exploitations and oppression. In talking about Black, white, and Asian American people, we hadn't even yet discussed Indigenous, Latinx, Arab, and Middle Eastern peoples. These names aren't colors either, but they too are imperfect and contested terms used in reference to evolving identities and groupings of people. I also wanted to emphasize to you that in the face of colonial conquest, conflicts, war, violence, famines, injustices, and oppression, people have always come together to survive, resist, fight back, thrive, and create new possibilities. And we come from these legacies of political struggle and freedom dreaming. I had no idea how to communicate this to you when you were 3, or to anyone else not steeped in the history and sociology of race and ethnicity. I made a mental note to myself that the next time you had a question about race, I would be ready to explain the loaded social meanings of skin colors. In summer 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we moved back to Chicago, your birthplace, after 3 years of living in Colorado. You came into childhood consciousness in northern Colorado. You loved your friends and teachers there, but I missed my friends, teachers, and community in Chicago, a city of big problems and big, beautiful shoulders. You were 5 years old when we moved to a rare, racially integrated neighborhood on the city's northwest side, where our neighbors next door were Black, Filipino, South Asian, Latinx, and white. The predominantly Asian American places, like your grandfather's neighborhood in Quincy, Massachusetts, Boston, Chinatown, the San Gabriel Valley, or Argyle in Chicago, were all faded moments in your pre-pandemic memory. On our first visit to Chicago Chinatown in that first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, your father hopped out of the car and jogged into Chiquan Bakery on Wentworth to pick up some pastries. In the car, we waited for him and watched masked people bundled up for the brisk fall weather, hustling in and out of restaurants, boba cafes, hair salons, Chinese herbal medicine shops, and greengrocers. The busy street was full of double-parked cars and their blinking hazard lights, canopied by red and gold tasseled lanterns set up for tourists who had avoided, and maybe even scapegoated, the neighborhood and Chinese American community for the pandemic. You asked me, "Mama, why does everyone look like us here?" I sucked in my breath, and as fast as I could, knowing your attention span was short, fumbled my way through a mini lecture about the history and contemporary legacies of anti-Asian immigration laws, racial covenants and racial segregation, ethnic enclave economies, gentrification, and community cultural wealth. In the back of my mind, I wished your father, a Chicago urban planner, was in the car to help answer your questions. Again, I was not ready to give you a developmentally appropriate explanation. I sank in the driver's seat, looked out the window at masked people who generally shared our shades of light brown and eyes that kissed in the corners, in a deeply segregated city, and silently lamented about how complex race and racism are to explain and understand. How do you teach a kindergartner about the histories and contemporary legacies of race and racism in a way that affirms her humanity and agency? Suddenly, I wished I had studied early childhood development and education in addition to my scholarly expertise areas: higher education, critical race theory, and Asian American studies. Critical questions from my dissertation committee at UCLA, journal article reviewers, and discussants and attendees at academic conferences and symposia had nothing on your young mind. Of course, afterward.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?